Mount Everest, majestic, mysterious, and deadly. Rising above the clouds, it's the ultimate challenge for those who dream of standing on top of the world. For over a century, climbers from all walks of life have risked everything to reach its summit. Some make it, many don't. Since the 1920s, more than 300 climbers have lost their lives on Everest. And here's the chilling part. Most of them are still there, frozen in place. Their bodies scattered across the slopes, untouched by time, impossible to recover. On Everest, the dead don't always come home. Moving a body in the death zone, where oxygen is scarce and the weather can turn in seconds, is nearly impossible. The cold locks the body in ice. The altitude adds hundreds of pounds of weight, and each step becomes a fight for survival, for both the living and the lost. But these fallen climbers aren't just statistics. Each of them has a story. And in this video, we'll uncover 5 of the most haunting cases, people who came to chase a dream and never left. This is a journey into the mountain's shadow. As always, viewer discretion is advised. David Sharp was a 34-year-old British climber who set out to conquer Everest his own way. No guides, no team, just him, his ambition, and a limited supply of oxygen. It was a risky approach, and ultimately, a fatal one. In May 2006, Sharp reached the summit. But the real danger on Everest isn't always going up, it's coming back down. Exhausted, freezing, and running dangerously low on oxygen, he took shelter in a small rocky alcove along the descent. The same place where another body, known only as Green Boots, had been lying for years. For hours, David sat there, barely conscious, clinging to life in the freezing shadows. That day, over 40 climbers passed by him. Many thought he was just another frozen body, like so many others on the mountain. A few realized he was still alive, but most kept moving, focused on their own summit goal. And even for those who might have wanted to help, the brutal truth is, at that altitude, help is almost impossible. The extreme cold, lack of oxygen, and sheer exhaustion make every step a battle. Getting someone down safely would take a small miracle. David never made it. He likely died from a combination of hypothermia, altitude sickness, and oxygen deprivation. It was his 3rd attempt to climb Everest from the north. On an earlier try, he'd already lost toes to frostbite. His death sent shockwaves through the climbing world, not just because of how he died, but because of why. The fact that dozens of climbers passed him by sparked a heated debate. In such extreme conditions, what do we owe each other? Is there a line between survival and compassion? Of course, David knew the risks. Climbing Everest without a team or enough oxygen is a gamble few survive, but that doesn't make his fate any less tragic. About a year after his death, Sherpas respectfully moved his body. They pushed it off the northeast ridge, letting him rest out of sight, joining the hundreds of others who remain on the mountain forever. On October 1st, 1979, Gerhard and Hannelore Schmatz from West Germany made history. They became the first married couple to reach the summit of Mount Everest, but their triumph would soon turn to tragedy, and Hannelore would become the first German and the first woman to die high on the mountain. The expedition was a group of 8 climbers and 5 Sherpas. Their final summit push began from the South Col on September 28th. Gerhard's team reached the top on October 1st after battling steep ridges and icy conditions. Exhausted but victorious, they made their way back to camp as night fell. The next day, October 2nd, it was Hannelore's turn. She set off with American guide Ray Janet and several Sherpas, but by the time they reached the summit, the weather had started to turn. Snow was falling, visibility was dropping, and their oxygen was running low. Still, they pressed on, reaching the top in the worsening storm. The descent quickly became a fight for survival. Ray Janet was exhausted and out of oxygen. At around 8,500 meters, he refused to continue. He was too weak to go on. He decided to bivouac right there on the mountainside. Hannelore and Sherpa Sungdair stayed with him, unwilling to leave him alone in such dangerous conditions. Another Sherpa, Ang Jiangbu, descended alone to get help. But it was already night, and the mountain was being swallowed by a furious storm. Winds roared across the ridges. Temperatures dropped below freezing. The storm raged all night. Rajane didn't survive. He froze to death in the snow. Hannelore and Sungdae somehow made it through the night, but they were in terrible shape, severely weakened, frostbitten, and clinging to life. The next day, as they tried to continue their descent, Hannelore collapsed near 8,300 meters. She sat down against her backpack, reportedly asking for water, and never got back up. She died there, frozen in place. Sungdae, barely alive himself, was eventually rescued by Sherpas climbing up from lower camps. But Hannelore was gone. Her body remained where she had fallen, sitting upright against her pack, her eyes still open, her hair blowing in the wind. It was a haunting image. For years, her frozen figure became a grim landmark for climbers making their way up the southern route of Everest. In 1984, a recovery attempt was made to bring her body down, but Everest, as always, demanded a price. 2 members of the recovery team fell to their deaths during the mission. No one tried again. Eventually, nature did what people could not. Over time, high winds swept Hannelore's remains off the ridge and down the Kangshung face, one of Everest's steepest and least forgiving drops. She vanished into the ice. But her story, and that haunting image of her final moments, remains one of Everest's most chilling reminders that even in triumph, the mountain never shows mercy. In May 1998, a couple from the United States, Francys and Arsentiev and her husband Sergei, set out to achieve the impossible, summiting Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen. It was a daring dream, a testament to their love and adventurous spirit. But their story would end in tragedy, forever marking Francys as Sleeping Beauty on Everest. After 2 failed attempts and grueling conditions, the couple made their final push to the summit on May 22nd. Their bodies were exhausted, and the lack of oxygen took its toll, but they pressed on, reaching the summit dangerously late in the day. Francys achieved her dream, becoming the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. But the descent would turn catastrophic. As they made their way down, the couple was separated. Sergei reached base camp the next morning, only to realize that Francys had not arrived. Fearing the worst, he set out to find her, carrying oxygen and medical supplies. His decision to return to the mountain would cost him his life. On the morning of May 23rd, a team of Uzbek climbers found Francys just below the summit. She was alive, barely conscious, suffering from frostbite and severe oxygen deprivation. Unable to move, she pleaded for help. The climbers, realizing the danger they were all in, decided to abandon their own summit attempt and help Francys. They gave her oxygen and carried her as far as they could, but their own supplies were running low and fatigue set in. They could go no further. Francys was still alive, but the situation was desperate. With their own lives at stake, the Uzbek team had no choice but to descend to safety. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. The next morning, on May 24th, British climbers Ian Woodall and South African Cathy O'Dowd stumbled upon Francys. At first, they mistook her for a lifeless body, but then she weakly muttered to them. They recognized her from base camp and tried desperately to help her. For over an hour, they attempted to give her oxygen and support, but she was too far gone. Francys, still clinging to life, begged them not to leave her. But in the end, the treacherous conditions and the bitter cold made it impossible for them to stay. Francys was left behind, lying in the snow, still clipped to the guide rope. Her body, frozen in time, gave the appearance of a peaceful figure, a stark contrast to the chaos of Everest. Climbers passing by would later nickname her Sleeping Beauty, her frozen form a haunting reminder of the mountain's unforgiving nature. Francys and Sergei, at the age of 40, died there, on the mountain she had dreamed of conquering. Sergei's fate remained unknown until the following year, when his body was discovered by Jake Norton during the 1999 Mallerie and Irvine expedition. It appeared Sergei had fallen to his death while trying to save his wife. In June 1924, two climbers, George Mallory and Sandy Irvine, set out on an expedition that would make their names legends in the history of mountaineering. Their goal? To be the first humans to conquer the summit of Mount Everest. George Mallory, a seasoned British climber, had already attempted Everest twice before. When asked why he wanted to climb the mountain, his famous reply, "Because it's there," captured the imagination of the world. Alongside him was Sandy Irvine, a 22-year-old engineer chosen for his technical expertise with oxygen systems. On June 8th, Mallery and Irvine were last seen alive by their teammate, Noel Odell, from a lower vantage point. Odell described seeing two figures scaling the second step of Everest, only a few hundred meters below the summit. Then, as if the mountain itself had decided to shroud them, clouds rolled in, and they were lost from view. Mallery and Irvine were never seen alive again. For 75 years, the fate of Mallery and Irvine remained one of mountaineering's greatest mysteries. Had they reached the summit, only to succumb to Everest's unforgiving conditions on their descent? In 1999, the Mallery and Irvine research expedition set out to uncover the truth. On May 1st, climber Conrad Anker, a member of the team, made a chilling discovery on Everest's northern face. He found the frozen remains of George Mallory at 26,760 feet, just 2,000 feet below the summit. Amazingly well preserved by the icy conditions, Mallory's body offered tantalizing clues about his final moments. Rope marks were found around his waist, suggesting he had fallen while still tied to Irvine. His right leg was severely broken, but his uninjured left leg was carefully positioned over it, indicating that Mallory had likely survived the fall for some time before succumbing to his injuries. In his pocket, Anker found a pair of dark snow goggles, hinting that the accident might have happened at dusk as Mallory and Irvine were descending. But there was one crucial item missing, the photograph of Mallory's wife that he had promised to leave at the summit. This absence raised new questions. Had Mallory and Irvine reached the summit before tragedy struck? The mystery deepened because Irvine had carried a Kodak vest pocket camera, lent to him by a teammate, Howard Somerville. If the camera had been found, the undeveloped film inside could have held the answer to one of mountaineering's greatest questions. Had Mallory and Irvine conquered Everest in 1924, nearly 3 decades before Sir Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay's confirmed ascent? Whether they conquered Everest or not, Mallory and Irvine achieved immortality in the hearts of all those who dare to dream the impossible. For nearly 20 years, climbers on Everest's unforgiving north face encountered a chilling sight, a frozen body known as green boots. The name came from the distinctive green Koflok mountaineering boots that were still on the body's feet. Located in a limestone alcove just 350 meters below the summit, the body became an eerie landmark, a stark reminder of Everest's deadly risks. The identity of green boots is widely believed to be Tsewang Paljor, a member of the Indo-Tibetan Border Police. Paljor, a head constable, was part of a 3-man team that tragically perished in the infamous blizzard of May 1996, which also claimed the lives of 5 other mountaineers. On May 10th, Paljor and his team reached the summit in worsening weather, but their descent turned disastrous as they were caught in a violent storm. Separated from his group by fierce winds and driving snow, Paljor sought refuge in a small cave at an altitude of around 8,500 meters. Exhausted, low on oxygen, and exposed to freezing temperatures, he sat there, shivering in the storm, until he ultimately froze to death. For years, Green Boots' resting place became a grim waypoint for climbers ascending the northeast ridge. It served not only as a haunting reminder of the mountain's dangers, but also as a marker for mountaineers to gauge how close they were to the summit. In 2014, at the request of Paljor's family, the Chinese government moved the body to a more discreet location. From that point on, climbers traversing the north side no longer saw the infamous green boots. However, in 2017, reports emerged that the body was visible once again, albeit partially obscured by rocks.